Room 214 was different from any place Jasmine had ever set foot in. Beneath the marble arches, everything seemed sharper, brighter, almost charged with a tension you could feel in your bones. The walls themselves seemed to listen. Every detail was scrutinized, every sigh, every nervous shuffle, every tap of a pen echoed as if the whole country was holding its breath. Dozens of TV cameras crowded together, their lenses staring like a forest of unblinking eyes. Each one was ready to capture history as it unfolded, ready to broadcast, not just to the reporters in the gallery, but to living rooms and smartphones across America. The air buzzed with whispered predictions. Bets placed on who would crumble first. In every corner, aides texted frantic updates, staffers adjusted ties and checked microphones, and committee clerks nervously triple-checked the seating chart. Over it all, the gallery was packed a who's who of Washington power players and political observers. Some were there for the spectacle, some for the headlines, but many came out of genuine hope that finally someone would ask the questions that had gone unanswered for generations. It was more than a hearing. It was a high-wire act broadcast to millions. You could feel the nerves tingling in the air, a sense that something irreversible was about to happen. It was the kind of moment that would be replayed for decades, the day when secrets came tumbling out and reputations were forged or shattered in real time. At the heart of the storm sat Donald Trump, his trademark scowl and defiant posture, never wavering, flanked by a fortress of attorneys who whispered in tight circles. He wore his famous red tie, a symbol, a warning, maybe even a shield. No one could guess what he was thinking, but everyone knew he'd come ready for battle. Directly across from him was Jasmine Crockett. She sat straight-backed, her hands folded calmly in front of her, but her eyes told a different story. They flashed with memory, pain, and purpose. For Jasmine, this wasn't just about politics. It was about legacy, about the father she'd watched sacrifice so much for his community. It was about every person who had ever been made invisible by those in power. The energy between them crackled like a live wire stretched tight. Every eye in the room flicked from Trump to Jasmine, back and forth, as if searching for a sign of weakness. The moderators, led by Anderson Cooper, tried to maintain order, but even he looked as tense as the rest, aware that anything could happen, and it would all be on camera. Jasmine glanced around once at the packed gallery, at the shining marble, at the folder beside her hand, and then back at the man who tried to humiliate her family. She breathed in slow and steady. No matter how many lights were on her, Jasmine knew today in this room she held the truth. For a moment, the world outside faded away. There was only room 214, the arena where secrets would finally meet sunlight, and where the nation would learn that sometimes a single voice could shake the pillars of power. The doors to room 214 opened with a soft creak. Jasmine Crockett entered quietly, her steps measured and unhurried. She didn't try to command attention, but somehow the energy in the chamber shifted as she crossed the threshold. Heads turned. Even the most distracted aides glanced up from their screens, drawn by something in her presence that felt both steady and electric. Jasmine wore a simple suit, dark blue sharp lines, nothing flashy. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her posture tall but relaxed. In her hands, she carried just one battered manila folder, no stacks of notes, no high-priced legal team hovering at her shoulder. She didn't need backup. What Jasmine brought into the room was something far heavier than paper history. If you look closely, you could see it in her eyes, a lifetime of stories, losses, and small victories burned into her gaze. Eyes that had watched her father serve his congregation through cold winters and hungry summers. Eyes that had witnessed her mother work late-night shifts just to pay the light bill. There was hurt there, but also pride in where she'd come from and the sacrifices made so she could sit in this very room face-to-face with the nation's most powerful. For Jasmine, today wasn't just about policy or headlines. It was about standing up for everyone who'd ever been silenced, overlooked, or told to wait their turn. It was about bringing her father's story, the story of a man who built hope where there was none, into the places where hope was too often replaced by power. She took her seat across from Trump, hands folded calmly, the folder resting lightly on the table. She didn't glance at the cameras or the crowd. Instead, she let the silence speak for her, stronger than any opening argument. Jasmine knew this moment wasn't just historic. For her, it was personal. And she was ready. The room had barely settled when Trump leaned into his microphone, his voice sharp and dripping with confidence. He didn't waste time with small talk or formalities. He looked straight at Jasmine, then let his gaze drift around the room, soaking in the attention. You know, Trump began his tone casual but cutting. I guess you get that fire from your father. Wasn't he some kind of preacher, always shouting about hope to people who couldn't pay their rent? That's cute, very inspirational. The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The tension was so thick it could have been sliced with a knife. A few committee members glanced at each other in shock, not quite believing what they just heard. Trump, satisfied with the effect, let a smug smile creep across his lips. Community service must run in your family, Jasmine. Too bad it never got you anywhere. He chuckled quietly, clearly expecting the room to join him. But the only sound was the collective gasp, a sharp inhale from AIDS reporters, even from some of his own allies. For Jasmine, the insult cut deep, not just because it targeted her father, but because it reduced a lifetime of sacrifice and service to a punchline. The camera zoomed in on her face, searching for a flinch or a flash of anger. But Jasmine stayed absolutely still. Her expression steeled, her eyes fixed not on Trump, but on something far beyond his reach. Millions watching at home could feel the chill in the air. It wasn't just political theater anymore. It was personal. And for the first time, a ripple of uncertainty crossed Trump's face, as if he'd poked a sleeping giant and wasn't sure what would happen next. The impact of Trump's words rippled through room 214 like a sudden thunderclap. For a moment, no one moved. Senators exchanged startled looks. Staffers at the edges of the room froze. Fingers paused over their keyboards. The buzz of whispers vanished, replaced by an anxious, heavy silence. In the gallery, a woman pressed her hand over her mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. An older man in the back row shook his head slowly, a mix of anger and sorrow on his face. Anderson Cooper, usually unflappable, looked genuinely unsettled as he glanced down at his notes. But the shock didn't stop at the chamber doors. Across the nation, millions were watching in real time. In a Detroit living room, a retired teacher leaned forward, gripping her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. At a church basement in Brooklyn, a group of elders watching together fell silent, remembering all too well what it felt like to be dismissed and disrespected. Social media exploded. #hearing room trended instantly. Clips of Trump's remarks were replayed and dissected by influencers, activists, and news anchors within minutes. In offices and classrooms, people stopped what they were doing, drawn to screens streaming the confrontation. And in those moments, something unexpected happened. The world didn't just watch, they reacted. For some, Trump's words reignited old wounds. For others, Jasmine's quiet composure became a beacon of pride and hope. Strangers found themselves united by anger, empathy, or sheer disbelief. Room 214 was no longer just a place. It was the eye of a cultural storm with shockwaves radiating out to every corner of America and beyond. As the tension in room 204 thickened, Jasmine's mind drifted, if only for a moment, back to a world far removed from marble halls and TV cameras. She remembered childhood mornings before sunrise, tiptoeing through a modest apartment filled with the gentle aroma of coffee and her father's voice softly humming old hymns. Her father, Joseph Crockett, wasn't just a preacher. He was the heart of their neighborhood. He knew everyone's name, from the mailman to the kids on the block who sometimes went to bed hungry. On winter nights, Jasmine watched him stack donated blankets by the door, ready to deliver them to families shivering without heat. On summer days, he organized cookouts for the whole street. No one left out. No one turned away. When Jasmine scraped her knee or came home in tears because another child at school made fun of her secondhand shoes, her father always knew what to say. Your worth isn't measured by what you wear, baby girl. It's measured by how much love you leave behind. He fixed broken steps, mended broken hearts, and filled every corner of their small home with hope. He stood in church each Sunday, preaching about forgiveness, courage, and community lessons. He lived, not just spoke. Those memories, warm and bittersweet, flickered through Jasmine's mind as she sat in the hearing room. She realized every moment of kindness, every lesson in resilience had prepared her for this day. Her father's strength lived on in her, steady as a heartbeat, guiding her through the storm. Jasmine's childhood was shaped not just by what her father said, but by everything he did. Even when money was tight and hope felt scarce, Joseph Crockett believed in giving more than he ever took. She remembered the freezing January when a neighbor's pipes burst, flooding their tiny apartment. Her father dropped everything and spent hours helping them mop, repair, and comfort their crying children. He didn't stop when the work was done. He returned the next day with groceries and a smile, as if helping was the greatest honor in the world. There were nights when Jasmine woke up to the quiet sounds of her father counting coins by the kitchen table, setting aside his bus fare to make sure someone else had enough for lunch at school. He never complained, never expected thanks. He simply believed we rise by lifting others. In church, his sermons were never just words. He would walk the pews afterward, noticing who looked tired, who might need a ride home, who needed a hand with bills. His acts of kindness weren't grand gestures. They were small daily miracles that slowly knit a fractured community together. Jasmine absorbed those lessons like sunlight. She saw that real strength wasn't about power, it was about service. She learned that dignity was not a luxury but a right every person deserved. Her father's legacy was clear courage, compassion, and a stubborn refusal to let anyone be invisible. Now, sitting in the spotlight of room 214, Jasmine realized that the fire burning within her was the same flame her father had carried, a flame kindled by sacrifice, kept alive by love, and now ready to illuminate the truth for the world to see. As Trump's words echoed in the chamber, Jasmine felt a sharp ache deep inside, a familiar sting she thought she'd left behind years ago. In that instant, it was as if she was 12, again standing on a cracked playground, while kids jeered at her worn-out shoes, mocking the way her father spoke, the color of her skin, the way her family lived with less. She remembered those moments of humiliation, the cold rush of shame, the burning desire to disappear, the tears she hid behind silent strength. Back then, her father would sit beside her on the sagging front steps and remind her, what others say can bruise your heart, but it cannot break your spirit unless you let it. Now, sitting in room 214, Jasmine realized how far she'd come, but also how the wounds of the past could still flare up raw and real. Trump's calculated insult wasn't just political, it was personal. It tried to strip away her father's dignity and reduce her legacy to a cruel joke. But as the pain surged, something else rose up inside her resolve. The shame no longer silenced her, it forged her courage. She felt the weight of everyone who'd ever been mocked, dismissed, or told they didn't belong. Jasmine straightened her back, lifted her chin, and let the memory of old pain become the fuel for new purpose. She knew in that moment why she was there, not just for herself, but for her family, her community, and all those watching who needed to see someone turn humiliation into hope. The fire inside her blazed brighter than ever. After Trump's words faded, the room seemed to shrink around Jasmine. All eyes locked on her, waiting for a fiery comeback, a trembling outburst, something loud to fill the electric silence. But Jasmine gave them none of it. She simply sat, her posture calm, her hands folded neatly atop the battered manila folder, her gaze steady and unwavering. She didn't rush to defend herself or her father. Instead, she let the silence hang, stretching out second after second, as heavy as thunder before a summer storm. Cameras zoomed in, searching for the crack in her composure. Committee members shifted uneasily, the tension almost unbearable. In living rooms across the country, viewers held their breath, sensing that something big was about to break. But Jasmine's silence wasn't innate weakness. It was deliberate, controlled, a quiet so powerful it commanded the entire room. In that hush, she owned the moment. She let Trump's insults echo back at him, exposing their emptiness. The stillness became a spotlight, and in that light, Jasmine's strength shone clearer than any words ever could. For a few suspended heartbeats, history stood still, waiting, watching, bracing for what Jasmine would do next. With the silence now thick enough to feel, Jasmine reached out and slowly slid the battered manila folder toward herself. Its cover was marked in bold red letters, Exhibit 14B, Trump Housing Files. The faint scrape of paper on wood seemed to echo through room 214, making everyone sit up a little straighter. She paused just long enough for every camera to focus, for every heart in the chamber to skip a beat. Then with deliberate care, Jasmine opened the folder. The air shifted. Senators craned their necks. Aides instinctively reached for their notebooks. Even Trump, usually unflappable, narrowed his eyes and shifted in his seat. The gallery leaned in. Inside the folder lay a stack of crisp official documents, contracts, memos, government grant records, each one stamped, signed, and dated. At the very top, Jasmine lifted out a sheet and held it so the committee and cameras could see. This, she began, her voice calm but commanding, is HUD Contract 340C, signed by Frederick Trump in 1973. It was meant to rehabilitate housing for minority families in East Flatbush. She laid the contract flat on the table, the bold signature facing Trump. A visible chill ran through the room. The audience sensed they weren't just witnessing another debate, they were about to see history brought into the light piece by piece with every page Jasmine revealed. Jasmine didn't just read off contracts and dates. She lifted the papers, but what she truly revealed were the lives hidden behind the ink. She held up a faded black and white photograph. "This is Linda Freeman," Jasmine announced, her voice steady but thick with emotion. She lived at 1473 Clarkson Avenue. Her rent was always paid on time. Her children's shoes lined the hallway. In 1973, she was told to leave for renovations. She came back to find the door welded shut. Everything she owned gone. Everything she loved locked away. Jasmine let the photo linger so everyone could see the pain etched on Mrs. Freeman's face. Then she placed it beside the contract and picked up a second document, a lease agreement with a child's name written in careful print. This is the Walker family. Their youngest son, Marcus, had just won his school's spelling bee when their building was cleared out overnight. No warning, no way back. For each name, Jasmine gave a memory, a birthday never celebrated in the old apartment, a graduation photo left behind, a Bible tucked under the floorboards and lost forever. These stories are not numbers. They are not statistics. They are families erased by greed and forgotten by power, but remembered here today. The committee members, reporters, and viewers everywhere felt the weight of each story. Faces once lost in the footnotes of history were now front and center, living proof of the real cost behind the contracts Jasmine laid bare. As Jasmine spoke, the effect on the room was almost physical. The once stiff, controlled atmosphere began to unravel. Faces, softened eyes glistened, and even the most seasoned politicians seemed shaken. Senator Booker, so vocal just minutes before, sat silent, now jaw-clenched, eyes lowered. A young staffer in the back quickly wiped away a tear, pretending to adjust her glasses. Across the aisle, Reporter Ayanna Presley folded her arms tightly, fighting to maintain composure as each new name was revealed. The gallery, once buzzing with restless whispers, had fallen into reverent silence. Reporters stopped typing. Cameras panned over faces, some full of disbelief, others twisted in grief, many simply stunned by the magnitude of loss now made real. But the ripples didn't stop at the marble walls. In homes, offices, and churches across the country, people paused, some in outrage, others in sorrow, all united in empathy. Social media feeds filled with "Your Justice," "For Freeman," hashtag "Remember the Walkers," and other hashtags carrying these forgotten families back into the nation's conscience. For a brief, powerful moment, the hearing room wasn't just a stage for politics. It became a place of collective memory and moral reckoning. And at the heart of it all, Jasmine's calm, unwavering presence held everyone together, reminding them that these stories were not relics of the past, but urgent calls to justice in the present. For the first time all day, the legendary Trump bravado began to fracture. Gone was the smirk and casual confidence. In its place, a jaw tight with tension, hands nervously adjusting his red tie, eyes darting between Jasmine, the documents on the table, and the cameras capturing every flicker of discomfort. He reached for the microphone, voice suddenly strained. "This is fiction. These people, these stories, they're exaggerated. Political theater, that's all." But his words sounded hollow, lacking their usual punch. The committee and the world saw the shift. The man who had mocked and dominated now looked cornered and deeply unsettled. Desperately, Trump gestured to his lawyers, who fumbled in through their folders, searching for rebuttals that wouldn't come. He tried to interrupt Jasmine, only to be silenced by Anderson Cooper and a wave of disapproval from the gallery. His usual tactics, sarcasm, deflection, bluster, fell flat in the face of the evidence, and the human pain laid bare before him. Sweat beaded on his brow as the room watched, silent and unblinking. Even his most loyal allies couldn't meet his gaze. The armor of invincibility had cracked, and in that exposed, desperate moment, Donald Trump looked less like a titan and more like a man frightened, angry, and alone. Just as the room thought it had seen every secret, Jasmine reached for a slim, transparent sleeve tucked inside the folder. She held it up for all to see, a grainy black and white photo, its edges worn and faded with time. A hush swept through the chamber. Even Trump froze, eyes narrowing, sensing danger. Jasmine's voice dropped to a solemn tone. "Before we talk about contracts and policies, let's talk about the roots of legacy." She turned the photo toward the committee and cameras. The image showed a crowd in front of a church in 1966, faces half obscured by shadows. At the edge of the frame stood a woman in a long coat and gloves, her face just visible enough to be identified Marianne Trump, Donald Trump's mother. Gasps erupted. Anderson Cooper sat forward, stunned. Reporters dropped their pens. The gallery leaned in as if pulled by an invisible force. Jasmine continued. This photo comes from municipal archives. The people around Mrs. Trump are unmistakable men in white hoods, members of a notorious hate group. I'm not here to make accusations, but to ask the same questions that have haunted my own family for generations. Who do we stand with when it matters most? She let the silence sit, the weight of the image heavy in every corner of room 214. Trump's face blanched. He shook his head, stammering denials, but the photo spoke louder than words, a haunting reminder that the roots of injustice can run deeper than anyone dares admit. As the shock of the photo still lingered, Jasmine reached into the folder once more and produced a small black flash drive. Her hands were steady. Her eyes never left Trump's face. The gallery hushed, sensing that the next revelation would be different, irreversible. Jasmine spoke softly, letting her words hang in the air. For years, the truth was spoken behind closed doors, never meant to see the light. She plugged the drive into the committee's audio system. A red light blinked. Every camera zoomed in, every heart seemed to skip a beat. A raspy male voice filled the room. Don't rent to blacks. Don't even show them the units. They scare off the good tenants. There was a pause, then a second sharper voice, undeniably Donald Trump's younger but unmistakable. What for? They'll just ruin the place anyway. A collective gasp swept through room 214. Anderson Cooper's pen slipped from his hand. Staffers froze, mouths open, as the raw, ugly truth echoed off the marble walls. Jasmine pressed pause. The silence was now absolute, every eye locked on her, every illusion shattered. She turned to the committee and spoke calmly. That tape was recorded in a Trump organization meeting. For decades, these words were denied, hidden, called rumors. Today, they are evidence. Trump stammered, his usual confidence gone. For a brief electric moment, the room was transformed not into a court but into a reckoning. The weight of history and accountability pressed down on everyone present. The silence after the recording was deafening. Jasmine allowed it to linger, letting the weight of what had just been heard fill every corner of room 214. Then she rose to her feet, eyes sweeping the faces before her lawmakers, aides, reporters, and a nation watching live. She spoke, her voice both gentle and unyielding. What you've heard today is not an isolated slip of the tongue nor a single act of cruelty. It is the echo of something larger, something designed and maintained over generations. Jasmine began laying out documents on the table, memos, contracts, faded photographs. This is not just about one policy or one bad actor. It's about a system, a legacy engineered to exclude to profit from erasure, to pass down both power and prejudice. She pointed to the family photo. When you see Marianne Trump at the edge of that frame, you see more than one moment. You see the culture she passed on, a silence in the face of hate, a willingness to turn away. She pointed to the eviction ledgers, the housing contracts, the red line maps. Each document, each voice you've heard is a thread in a web of exclusion that stretches from Brooklyn to boardrooms, from City Hall to the White House. Jasmine's voice broke, but she pressed on. The recording is ugly, but it's honest. These policies weren't accidents, they were decisions. This is what happens when bigotry isn't just tolerated, but inherited. She finished with a truth that left the room breathless. The legacy of discrimination is not just history, it is living, breathing, and it's here in this room with us now. But today we name it, and only when we name it can we begin to break it. For a moment, no one moved. The web of denial was visible and at last unraveling. As the last page settled onto the table, the door at the side of the chamber creaked open. Every head turned. Jasmine's voice was low but clear. I called Derek Wallace to the stand. A tall, serious man in his mid-50s walked to the front. No notes, no entourage, just the haunted confidence of someone who had held secrets too long. The clerk said a nameplate, Derek Wallace, former Trump Organization, Regional Operations Manager. He adjusted the microphone, voice trembling at first, but quickly gaining strength. I worked for the Trump Organization from 1994 to 2002. I saw everything, the budgets, the maps, the internal memos. The room was utterly silent. Even Trump's stare, jaw clenched, as Wallace continued. We used color-coded maps by zip code. Black neighborhoods were red zone. That meant no maintenance, no new leases, no repairs. I was told to let buildings decay until tenants left. The code word was additional review, but it always ended in denial. A murmur swept the committee. Wallace reached into his battered briefcase, producing 3 internal memo signatures visible. These, he said, are meeting notes, one signed by Donald Trump himself. Phrases like non-optimized demographics and increased value zones that was code for whitening the building for driving black families out. Jasmine nodded, locking eyes with Wallace, a silent thank you, passing between 2 people who knew the cost of truth. The public watching in living rooms and on phones everywhere felt the ground shift beneath the story. No longer rumor, no longer accusation, but sworn testimony, evidence from inside the empire itself. The room held its breath as Derek Wallace, hands trembling slightly, unfolded a yellowed memo from his case. He looked straight at Jasmine, then at the senators, before turning to face the nation. I remember one day in late 1997, Wallace began, voice steadying as he relived the memory. We were finalizing a property flip in East New York. The tenants, mostly black families, had already been pushed out. Some tried to come back saying they'd never gotten proper notice. That day, Donald Trump himself showed up with 2 executives. He'll never forget what he said to the superintendent, loud enough for everyone to hear: change every lock. Board the rear entrances. Do it fast before they sneak back in. A wave of shock rippled across the hearing room. Wallace's voice dropped heavy with regret. He didn't call them residents. He didn't say families. He just said they were a problem to be erased. Jasmine leaned forward, her tone gentle but piercing. Were these orders documented? Mr. Wallace nodded and lifted another memo, this one bearing Trump's signature. Here, internal note: seal all units. Hold occupancy until resale. Use temp security if necessary. We weren't told to help people. We were told to empty the buildings and make sure they never came back. The committee members exchanged stunned looks. Even those accustomed to political scandal seemed rattled by the bluntness of the policy and its open cruelty. Outside the hearing room, Americans watched in disbelief as the ugly machinery of systemic discrimination was laid bare, ordered from the very top, executed with chilling precision. The instant Wallace finished reading, the hearing room exploded, not in noise, but in a tension so sharp it felt like thunder. Senators stared at each other in disbelief, mouths parted, eyes wide. Even those used to the roughest political battles looked shaken, some whispering to staff, others simply unable to speak. Senator Booker's jaw dropped, pen frozen in his hand. Ayanna Pressley wiped away a tear before turning back to glare at Trump, her expression a storm of sorrow and rage. Anderson Cooper looked directly at the camera, struggling to find words. The press section became a flurry of frantic typing phones, raised text flying, bombshell testimony. Direct orders from Trump whistleblower confirmed systemic racism. Within seconds, Twitter, Facebook, and every news feed across America flooded with hashtags. Wallace testifies, lock change memo, justice for tenants, legacy on trial. Screenshots and video clips spread like wildfire. People everywhere, teachers on break, nurses at the nurses' station, retired. Grandparents at home paused what they were doing to watch, read, and share. Comment threads burst with anger, pain, and disbelief. Others posted old family photos with captions, "This could have been us." Inside the chamber, the shock was palpable, a mixture of vindication, grief, and a sense that something irreversible had just occurred. The truth was out, and nothing could put it back in the shadows. The chaos in the chamber wasn't just on the outside, it hit Trump at his core. His legendary composure, once unshakable, was now a mask slipping away. The hands that used to gesture with swagger now fumbled with his tie, his papers, anything to avoid the stares of the committee and the cameras. His lawyers leaned in, whispering urgently, their faces pale and frantic. They flipped through binders, searching for any loophole, any argument. Nothing fit. The tools that always worked, denial, mockery, deflection, were suddenly powerless against the mountain of evidence and raw emotion pouring from every corner of the room. Trump tried to speak, but the confidence was gone. His voice came out cracked and hollow. This is all lies, fake news, political hit job. But even he could hear the emptiness in his own words. The senators no longer shrank from his gaze. Even the most loyal allies shifted uncomfortably, some turning away, others staring at the floor. The pressure was relentless. Headlines exploded across every screen in real time. Clips of the testimony and the secret recording were everywhere. Trump's image, once larger than life, now looked cornered, diminished, human. For the first time, he looked like a man not in control, but at the mercy of a truth he couldn't rewrite. As the chamber sat silent, the air thick with the collapse of old lies, Jasmine rose to her feet one last time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She looked around the room at the politicians, the lawyers, the reporters, the people watching in living rooms across America, and then her gaze settled gently on Trump. For a moment, there was no committee, no headlines, just the story of one family standing in for a nation. My father built hope with empty hands, she began, her voice steady but raw with memory. He gave what little he had to others, even when the world told him he had nothing worth giving. He believed in the promise of this country, even when it broke him, even when doors closed in his face, and voices told him, "You do not belong here." Jasmine's hands tightened on the desk as she continued, her words trembling with both grief and pride. He never built walls to keep people out. He built tables and invited everyone he could fit. And every night he told me, "Child, your dignity isn't what others let you keep, it's what you refuse to let them steal." She looked directly at Trump, her voice ringing clear and true. "You didn't just steal homes, Mr. Trump. You tried to steal dignity. You tried to erase families from the record, to write their pain out of history. But you forgot something. When you steal a person's home, you plant a seed of resistance. And that seed grows. It grows into generations who refuse to be silenced." Jasmine turned to the committee, to the nation, watching her voice now the voice of every erased and overlooked soul. "This isn't just my story. This is America's unfinished story. Every door welded shut, every child turned away, every family denied a seat at the table. It is not just history. It is now. But so is our courage. So is our truth. So is our refusal to disappear." She paused, the silence so heavy it seemed the room itself was listening. "My family's struggle is not over, and neither is this country's. But today at least the silence is broken. Today, we remember. Today, we begin again." Jasmine's words lingered in the air like a hymn for the forgotten. All across America, people felt seen, heard, and at last remembered. As Jasmine's final words echoed through the committee room, the ripple of her testimony burst past those walls and swept across the nation. In homes from Brooklyn to Birmingham, from rural Mississippi to the heart of Los Angeles, televisions flickered as people watched, some with tears, others with clenched fists. A grandmother in Detroit dusted off an old photo album showing her granddaughter the house her family once lost to a redevelopment project. In Chicago, a retired postal worker finally spoke about the night her father was evicted, with no warning, leaving everything behind but hope. Social media lit up with a new movement. People posted childhood photos in front of buildings that no longer existed, tagged with #My family was here and #We belong. Some shared old eviction slips yellowed with age. Others wrote, "Jasmine gave me the courage to tell the truth my family carried in silence for decades." Town halls, community centers, and churches buzzed with new energy. Stories long buried in shame were now told with pride. Parents called their grown children and through trembling voices admitted for the first time, "This happened to us too." Talk show hosts invited guests who'd never before spoken in public. News anchors choked up on air. Even old rivals and politicians reached out, compelled to listen and learn. America, its people, not just its politicians, was awake, listening, remembering. Jasmine's testimony had become more than news. It was a catalyst for confession, for courage, for community. For the first time in a long time, the nation felt like it was healing together. One story, one truth, one voice at a time. Within hours of Jasmine's testimony, the story became inescapable. News tickers scrolled her name. Cable anchors replayed the emotional monologue, the recording, in the face of every survivor. Hashtags like #Justice for Freeman, Enos Unlock Our History. Legacy of Truth trended for days. In cities across the country, lines formed outside city halls and courthouses. People came forward, some for the first time in their lives, bringing yellowed documents, faded photos, eviction notices, and family Bibles. Former tenants, now grandparents, found the courage to speak on camera about doors that had been welded shut, keys they'd never been allowed to use, and the family split apart by greed. Grassroots groups sprang up overnight. Volunteers organized legal aid clinics and storytelling nights. Marches and candlelight vigils filled city parks from Harlem to Houston. Murals appeared on the sides of abandoned buildings, faces and names Jasmine had read into the record, now painted in bold colors for the world to see. The press, once focused on politics as usual, pivoted to in-depth reporting on housing injustice, redlining, and stolen generational wealth. School teachers asked students to interview elders about neighborhood history. Sunday sermons across faiths echoed the new language of dignity and restoration. The movement wasn't angry, though anger burned within it. It was relentless, hopeful, and bigger than any single leader. For every story shared, a dozen more surfaced. For every survivor who spoke, a crowd gathered to listen. What began as one woman's stand had become a rising tide. Jasmine's voice, her father's, her mother's, and now millions more had broken the silence, turning a hearing into a healing. America was not just remembering, it was beginning finally to reckon. A week after the hearing, Jasmine found herself walking the cracked sidewalks of her old neighborhood, the place where her father once preached, and her mother sorted mail late into the night. The city had changed, new storefronts, fresh coats of paint, but the bones of the block were the same. She paused in front of the old brick building that used to be their apartment. The windows were boarded now, but the handprints of memory lingered everywhere. The stoop where she'd played jacks with her cousins. The alley where her father broke up neighborhood fights. The church steeple peeking over the roofs like a watchful guardian. Jasmine pressed her palm to the cool brick. For a moment the noise of the city faded, and she saw it all again, her mother's tired smile, her father's gentle sermons echoing up the stairwell, neighbors laughing and arguing on long summer nights. All of it gone but not lost. She remembered the night they left, keys surrendered, dignity nearly taken. But as she stood there now, a grown woman carrying a nation's stories, she understood loss was real, but so was survival. They had built something no one could ever evict, a legacy of courage, compassion, and truth. Jasmine looked up at the sky, misty with dusk. My family's home was taken, but their love remains. Their hope planted roots that no policy could ever dig up. She smiled softly, a promise to her parents and to all who'd ever been shut out. We're still here, and we will not be erased. With renewed strength, Jasmine turned to leave her footsteps, joining those of generations who had come before, and generations who, thanks to her fight, would have the right to stay. As the credits roll on news specials and viral videos, Jasmine's words echo louder than any headline. Standing at the edge of her old street, she faces not just her past, but all of us. She looks into the camera, into the eyes of a nation suddenly awake. We've seen the truth. We can't pretend we haven't, she says, her voice soft but unwavering. The walls that shut us out, the doors welded shut, the voices erased from history, they aren't just stories. They are warnings, they are lessons, they are calls for action. She takes a breath, her gaze fierce with hope and resolve. If you've ever lost something you loved, your home, your dignity, your place in this world, know this: you are not alone, and your story is not finished. We write it together starting now. Jasmine's words linger in the air, a challenge and a promise. So what will we do with the truth? Now that it's out in the open, will we look away, or will we look around and see each other? Will we turn back to silence or turn forward to justice? She smiles, a quiet confidence shining through the pain. The fight is not over. The story is not over. We are the authors now. As the screen fades to black, millions are left reflecting, not just on what happened, but on what comes next. Jasmine's final question remains: if truth is finally free, who will dare to answer it? If this story stirred something inside you, don't let the feeling fade when the video ends. Silence has a cost. For generations, silence kept doors shut and dreams stolen. But every time one voice dares to speak, a chain breaks. Every story told makes it harder for history to repeat itself. You have the power right now to break that chain. Share your family's story. Speak up about what matters in your community. Stand up for the person next to you who's still afraid. Teach your children the difference between comfort and courage. Support the causes and leaders who fight for justice, not just for themselves, but for all of us. Demand transparency from those in power. Refuse to let bigotry or injustice hide behind polite words or closed doors. Subscribe to this channel, Mr. Exposed Stories, so you never miss a truth that could change everything. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experience or your hope for the future, because someone out there is waiting for permission to speak. And tonight, before you turn off the lights, ask yourself, what story am I carrying that needs to be told? Whose silence can I help break? Let's turn memory into movement and pain into purpose. Let's make sure the next generation inherits courage, not silence. Speak up, stand together, pass the truth on. The greatest injustice is not just what happens in the dark, but what we allow to stay hidden by our silence. When we refuse to speak up for what's right, when we ignore the pain of others or downplay the struggles of those less powerful, we help injustice survive from one generation to the next. But when even one person dares to tell the truth, It creates a ripple that can break chains, heal wounds, and inspire courage in countless others. Your story, your voice, and your willingness to stand up, no matter how small it seems, can make all the difference. If you believe that every voice matters and every truth deserves to be heard, subscribe to Mr. Exposed Stories right now. Join a community that stands for justice, empathy, and real change. Share this video comment with your own experiences, and let's make sure that silence is never the legacy we leave behind. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the next story could be yours, and together our voices are unstoppable.